past year I've been using this DJI Osmos camera for my videos. It's done a real good job, but recently the back display went out. So I don't know what's wrong with it, but I had to switch over to my XTU. I had two XTU backup cameras that I've used from time to time, and I started using this one, and then it started acting up. So in the middle of this video I switched over to the current one. You'll notice I didn't bother to set the date or anything. It's really not 2021, but you'll notice that later in the video. So I thought I'd explain what was going on there. Ken Weller with New Tech Inventors today, down here at the print farm in the temporary assembly area, and I'm actually assembling some Anet A8-PLUS printers. You can see I have two there that I've already assembled and set up and done a test print on. That stack, those are all empty boxes of printers assembled down here in the past week and a half. Quite a few Kingroons, and I'll be showing you the Kingroon setup that we have now. We currently have 8 of them set up in there, ready to start test printing. And I'll try to get a video when we start test printing those. So the Kingroon's a new addition to the print farm down here, and that will be our smallest format printer, where these 300 by 300 Anet A8-PLUSs are the larger format that we're using down here, in addition to the Tronic CXY2 Pros, which are slightly smaller, 255 by 255. We needed more of these 300 by 300 for some jobs that we're running that require the larger platform. So that's why we're trying to get these assembled and add them to the ones that we already have. I think that will bring us up to about 8 of these A8-PLUS Anet printers. So I'm going to go ahead and be assembling. This is the next to the last one that we have to assemble, and since I had the camera down here, I thought, well, I'll include a little bit. One thing about these Anet A printers, I really like the way they print and their capability and everything, but they require a lot of assembly time. The Kingroons, 10 or 15 minutes, you're up and running. With the Anets, not so much. As you can see, all of these parts have to be put together, and a lot of wiring and everything else. So I'll flip this camera on as I go along and kind of show you the progress, and we'll get this A8-PLUS ready to go. Okay, now as you can see, I have the 2 rails for the y-axis and this bracket that holds the build plate, and the pieces on each end. Altogether there are 30 different screws here and on the end. All of these screws are loose. I intentionally did not tighten them down, because once you get it together, you want to make sure that the bearings are lined up and running freely, because they can be twisted a little bit. And by waiting until they're on the rails before you tighten the bearings down will help reduce the friction and increase the life of the bearings. Also, another thing, if you can notice, this thing right here pivots. So what I do, I bring it all the way down against the bearings, and I know everything's squared up. Then I tighten these 3 and these 3 screws first. That gets that tightened. Then I can go ahead and tighten the screws on these ends, because I know my spacing's working good. Go to the other end, slide this thing down and tighten those two. Then I bring it down to the end and tighten the remaining 16 screws that hold the bearings in place. Once everything's tight, then I know that it's as well aligned as it can possibly be. That'll allow, like I said, less friction, extended wear, and good operating machines. So thought I'd show you that at this stage of the game, and I'm going to go ahead and continue assembling, and I'll be back with you shortly. Okay, we're a little farther along now. As you can see, I've got everything tightened down here. I've got this on, the belt's on, the motor for the y-axis is mounted. The adjustments have been made for the belt. And I've got these two verticals on, but I haven't tightened them down yet either. Leave them just a little bit loose until I get the crossbar on the top. One other thing I wanted to mention, if you notice I'm building this on a 3/4 inch finished plywood that's almost perfectly level, and as I assembled the frame I had it flat on this wood and gradually tighten the screws all the way around on the frame. Then I can rotate it 90 degrees, and if there's any wobble, something's off. But everything checks out, and we want to get everything squared up. And that's one reason I leave these a little loose, because you can see I can tighten it down and have it some various positions. But I want to get this top piece on and make sure that they're straight there. Then I'll tighten these bottom screws. I'll check back with you in a little bit. Okay, we're a little farther along now. We have our Z-axis motors installed, and if you notice I have a piece of the smooth rod inserted in each one of these and at the top. The reason for this is before I tighten down these two screws and set the position of this motor, I want it to be vertical as much as possible. You want this to be in perfect alignment here. Again, it cuts down on wear and tear on the bearings and the motor and stress there. So before I tighten these two screws down this bracket to mount this motor, it can wobble left to right. I put that shaft in each one to make sure that I get them aligned. Okay, next day, and we're back on this Anet A8-PLUS printer. If you noticed, I've got my X-axis rods here partially through. I put my 3 bearings on, but I've not tightened down these screws yet. I'll wait until I get these rods in place and make sure I've got good free movement. Then I'll tighten the bearings down, and that'll keep the resistance down on the bearings. So here we go. Okay, I've got my rods tapped in now, and you can see this is operating freely. Now I'll go ahead and tighten down the screws. Okay, as you can see, I've installed my extruder motor and extruder and hot end, and everything moves freely on here, and I have my belt connected to one side. So we're ready to go ahead and get the belt in and get the X-axis drive motor on. Okay, as I install the belt, if you notice, I actually pushed a little loop through here. So it's better to loop that belt in there, and then as I install this extruder motor from behind, it will go inside of that belt and be easier to get the belt on that way. Okay, now we've got our fans mounted. We've got the wires for the extruder motor and also for the heating element. And when you're installing this heating element, as you have to do on the A8, there's a thermocouple alongside of it. And you need to straighten that thermocouple out and make sure it goes as far into this hole as you can, this small hole. You want that thermocouple to be in the center of this heat block so it gives you the most accurate heat measurement. That's what's going to control your hot end temperature. So I've got all these wires together now, and I'm going to continue hooking up the wires to the other servo motors and also the limit switches. Now we've got our power supply installed, we have our motherboard installed, and we've wired the limit switches, the motors. So we have all of these wires now, and we're going to wire loom them together in a neat form, and then we'll be running them in and connecting them to our motherboard. Okay, as you can see, we've wrapped all of these cables in much neater forms here, except for the bed cable. And what I wanted to show you on that, this cable comes like this. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to tape this area around here and make a strain relief, because having these wires on that bed moving back and forth and flexing is not a good thing. So we want to make sure that we keep that flexing to a minimum. So as soon as I get that ready, we'll go ahead and start wiring things up, and we'll be back and I'll show you how I took care of this problem. Okay, we're back now with our printer here. When I left off, I was wiring up the cables and connectors, and you can see here where I put the electrical tape around this connector and ran it on down onto our wire wrap. So this is basically going to put more of a strain relief on those wires, because there's a lot of movement going back and forth, and we don't want those wires flexing and breaking. I actually had one break on me one time, and so that should take care of that. You can see we've got all of our wiring hooked up to our control board. Everything's about ready to go. I'm in the process right now of changing out the nozzle. This is the standard 0.4 nozzle that comes with it, and this is the 0.8 that I'm replacing it with. And I definitely want to get the nozzle replaced and everything before I start leveling the bed and setting my zero offset. And so as soon as I get this put back together and tightened up, we'll be ready to level the bed, do our zero offset, do a test print, see how it goes. Okay, we've got our nozzle swapped out. I always put these little covers or blankets on the hot end on the heating element. This helps hold the heat in and keep it more consistent. Also saves a little bit of energy, kind of like insulating your house in the winter time. It retains that heat and keeps it more constant. So we put that on. When I put these nozzles on, I make sure they're really tight, because the pressure that builds up can cause them to leak around there a little bit, and we don't want that. So we're ready to start our testing now. Doing a little test print on our glass bed. It looks like we've got a pretty good zero offset and a fairly level bed. We aren't using any kind of glue or anything on the glass surface, it's just the original glass, which is the same thing I've been doing on all of these A8 printers. When I start them up, I print on the virgin glass. I'm getting good adhesion. So anytime we can print on glass without having to add some type of chemical to add adhesion, the better off we are. Looks like these beads are laying down pretty good. Running at 210 with the temperature, and normally I'd run this PLA on this printer at about 220 to 225. So I'm going to go ahead and increase the temperature here and increase it up to 225. Okay, and it's working its way up there now. It's at 220. The reason I'm increasing the temperature is because we have the 0.8 nozzle in here, and we're pushing a lot more filament through it, and it takes a little more heat to heat that additional amount of filament going through that nozzle. So we're at 225. That's a better temperature. It's still laying down just as well, but at 225, that's 15 degrees hotter Celsius than it was, and that additional 15 degrees will help those layers adhere to each other and give us a stronger, more durable part. So anytime you can print with an increased temperature without causing problems to your print, the better off you're going to be as far as strength and having the different layers adhere to each other well. Okay, so it looks like we're passing our test here, and we'll be adding this Anet A8-PLUS to the other ones that we have in the shop now. Okay, we found a home for that last Anet. So now we've got all 6 of these set up. We've already done a test print on all of them. We just need to get the right file in there for the job we're going to be printing, which these larger pieces up here. And then we still have one Anet over here. Didn't quite fit on our shelves, and can't put it on the top shelf. I believe it'd be too high. And we're just about to run out of space in here. Getting some of this stuff packed up. And here are the Kingroons. We have 2 new KP3s and 6 new KP3S printers here. You can see we put them in here at an angle so we could get 4 of them on each one of these shelves. And then when we come around behind here, then we have our power supplies back here and better access to change filament. So it's good to have a shelf where you can get to the back of these things as well as the front. But we've got them all wired up. They're all ready to go. So we'll get some print jobs ready for them and get them printing and let you see how they work. I may do that this weekend before the weekend's over. It's Saturday afternoon. We're going to be printing some down here Monday, so we may have time to get these going along with some of the other printers that'll be running, and possibly run the A8-PLUSs. So got a little bit more to do, trying to get things organized and straightened up down here. So just a lot of work. So until the next time, happy printing from New Tech Inventors.